Hello, and welcome to the Pillar Diaries, episode number 10, featuring Sister Stephanie Hughes. On August the 3rd, 1997, her life was forever changed when she was arrested and imprisoned for 2 years. Over the last 25 years, God has taken her on a journey of deliverance, discovery, and restoration. Sister Stephanie went on to receive her bachelor's degree from Thomas More University, after which she finished her master's degree from Northern Kentucky University, where she is currently pursuing her doctorate degree. Today, Sister Stephanie is a psychiatric nurse practitioner with a focus on addiction, treating psychiatric people with women who have found the courage to look up to Christ when they have reached their bottom. Stephanie is a member of the prison team with the Princess Within Prison Conference. Sister Stephanie helps the very women who walk the road she once walked. Isn't that what this is all about? That God delivers us from places, that we in turn show other women that through Christ they can be delivered too. If we're all honest, we've been in some sort of chains where God had to step in and set us free. These women are our pillars, and their stories are our monuments. If we ever fail to tell their stories, what they have built will crumble. These are their diaries.
All right, so hello, my name is Stephanie Hughes, and I'm from Northern Kentucky. And if those of you who don't know, that's about 20 minutes south of Cincinnati. And one thing I love about Northern Kentucky is it's not northern, so we're not quite north, but we're not quite south yet. So sometimes I can have a twang and then sometimes I don't. So you might hear that back and forth throughout the video, but that's just who I am. Sometimes I'm southern, sometimes I'm northern, but that's why I live in Northern Kentucky and that's why it's so great. And I'm so thankful to be able to share with you today the journey that God has taken me on to find Him. So if we start way back in the beginning, I was born to a mom who was 17 years old. She was the oldest of 3 children, and she really helped her mom raise her siblings. My mother has always been crazy responsible. She was the oldest, and her mom was also a single mom. So we had this, she was a single mom, and then when she was raising me, she was a single mom. So when she was growing up, she was the responsible one. My grandmother leaned on her a lot. I come from a very matriarchal family. The men in my family were not very present, but the women were incredible. They're strong and hard-headed and hardy, and they work hard. And so that's kind of the lineage that I come from, these strong women who really not a lot of men's influence in our lives. And my mom, growing up, my grandmother was a single mom, and she relied a lot heavily on my mom because my grandmother had to work. She was raising 3 kids. It was the 50s, so my mom had to really take the role and responsibility of the caregiver in the home. And so she helped to raise my aunt and my uncle too. Well, from the time my mom was a little girl, she would always walk to Sunday school. My grandmother never really went to church very much, but my mom, she would walk to Sunday school, and she would tell me these stories about having her sweet little dress on, and everybody wore white gloves to church, and she would have her little white glove on, and she would have her nickel down inside of her glove for her offering. And so always just imagine this little girl, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, walking to church. It was a Catholic or Episcopalian church that she went to, but my mom, she really does love Jesus. And so that was the way that she walked, and she did it by herself. No one was motivating her to go to church, get up and go to church and get ready to go to church. My mom just had it in her heart to do that. But things at home were kind of rough. My grandmother weighed heavily responsibility on my mom. And so my mom was always looking for really kind of a way of escape, of, getting out from under that responsibility. And she met my dad when she was 16 or 17, and she got pregnant with me. And I really feel like my mom felt that that was the way that she could get out from underneath her mom's home and really just kind of be on her own and do things her own way. So she married my dad, and my dad's background, he is the youngest of I think seven or eight children, and his oldest sibling is a boy. Then he has all of these sisters, and he's the youngest. Okay, so he's the youngest in the family, and my mom got married, and they had me on. Should I tell my birthday? I don't know. I don't think I'll tell my age, but it's March 23rd, just FYI. So, but I won't tell the year, so you can keep guessing. So she had me on March 23rd, and I was born in Covington, Kentucky at St. Elizabeth Hospital, and we lived in Covington in a little apartment. My mom always tells the story, it was a little apartment. And my dad, I mean, they were teenagers, they were babies trying to raise, me as a teenager. So, and he wasn't very responsible. My dad was alcoholic. He didn't really care about working. He was the youngest of like 7 or 8 children, and he was the boy of all of these sisters. So he was really kind of used to getting his way about things and didn't really care a lot about responsibility. He would have jobs after jobs, but he was always after like what was the next fun thing to do, which I can appreciate that about someone, because I am always looking for the next fun thing to do, no matter where I am. He was alcoholic, and needless to say, he really wasn't very kind to my mom. My mom, again, bared the burden and the responsibility of a family. 3 years later, my youngest sister Amy was born, and I remember my mom always tells a story that when she brought my sister home from the hospital, she said, I looked at her and said, "Take it back. I wanted a brother." So from the very beginning, I didn't want a sister. I wanted a brother. But I am grateful for my sister. I love all my sisters, but I'm grateful that she was part of my life. I'm grateful that Mom didn't give me a brother, or God didn't give me a brother. So then by the time my mom was 17, 18, 19, 20, before she was 25, she had 2 little kids, and then I dare say 3 children, because she was trying to raise my husband too. So my mom worked, and she put food on the table, and she cared for us. She protected us fiercely. She was always so worried. Like, I can remember being little, and we would live in an apartment, and we really weren't even allowed to go outside and play, because my mom just had this fear of, these are my children, these are my babies, I don't want anything at all to happen to them. I need to protect them from the outside world. So every major holiday when my mom was married to my dad, he would be intoxicated, everyone, and then some in between. And he wasn't the nicest when he was drinking. I don't ever remember him physically assaulting my mom, but I do remember this particular occasion. It was, I don't know, it was some holiday. Again, him having all of those siblings, there was a huge family, so we were always together. But this one time, I think it might have been Christmas, my dad was drunk again, and my mom was like, "You know what? We're going home. I'm putting the children in the car. If you're not coming with me, fine, I don't care." And so he stood at the car, kind of off to the side. I was in the back seat. I remember my mom's in this big, like 1970s Cadillac, and she ran over his toes because he would not get out of the way. So again, just this fierce woman, fiercely protecting her children from all the outside world, anything. I mean, she really wanted the best for us. And it wasn't long after that she did finally leave him. She divorced him. She got the courage to leave. She said, "I'm not taking this anymore. You're not adding any value to my life, and I'm constantly having to fight with you." So she did leave him, and I can remember I really wasn't very upset about that. I was like, I feel like that my sister and I turned to each other and kind of cheered, because then there would be not so much pressure in the house. And I guess we probably always felt bad for my mom having to always take the responsibility for things. So they divorced, and then not too long after that, she met, maybe a year or so, she met a man who ended up being my stepfather, who was a wonderful man. I loved him so much. He was a father, I mean, we connected instantly. And my mom and I are close, but I'm kind of a daddy's girl kind of girl, not very girly or dainty and frilly. I'm kind of a mess. My mom always said I walked like a farmer. So I'm kind of tomboyish. And so he kind of filled that role, and he was a fireman. And so I really, he was a man of honor to me, and we connected, we fished, and like he would take us places. We went on vacation. He taught me how to dive. He taught me how to ride a bike. He invested in my life, and I loved him dearly. Well, during the period of time, it was either after they had gotten married, I really can't put the timeline directly together because I was so young, and the time that my parents were separated, my sister and I would go to my biological father's house for visitation. And one of the first times I can ever remember having a drink of alcohol was, well, let me even back that up further. When they were still married, I remember he had made a plate of pot brownies. And of course, I'm 5 and there were brownies on the counter and I ate them. I ate pot brownies at 5 years old. And so I was sick as a dog, and I can remember my mom. The only way I know that they were like pot brownies is because I could hear my mom on the phone arguing with him. What are you doing making pot brownies in my house? She's eaten them and now she's sick as a dog. But that was my first experience with a mind-altering substance that was not intentional, but could have been the pathway to what led up to later, you know? So that was the first experience. So then fast forward to our weekend visits. I remember being at a carnival with him, and I get motion sickness, something awful. Like I can't even hardly ride in a car. I take Zofran to keep the nausea down. I take peppermint oil and slather it all over me if I have to travel because I get motion sickness. So I was on this ride and it was spinny, you know, and I remember being so sick. I'm like, I can't, I'm like ready to vomit here. And he gives me his beer to drink, because he thought it was funny to give an 8-year-old that was nauseous a beer to drink. So, you know, those were my experiences. That's the things that he exposed me to. Another time when we were at the house, and this was the most pivotal point in my life, was we were at his house and he was across the street at a party drinking. And my sister and I were young, and I was 8 and she was 5. And I remember we were scared because we were left at the house by ourselves, and it was dark and it was scary. And I remember the window being opened and screaming out the window for our dad, "Daddy, Daddy," you know? So then when he came home, he was heavily intoxicated and he proceeded to molest my sister and I. And that was the trauma that probably had all the other cascading events that happened in my life. Now, I can remember that incident and it happening to me, but what hurt me the most was that I was laying there as an older sister and my younger sister and not protecting her. And so that probably was the most traumatic thing for me, was knowing that my sister was being assaulted, but being an 8-year-old and knowing that it wasn't right, but being afraid that I didn't want it to happen to me, or not knowing what to do because you're put in a situation where that's supposed to be somebody who protects me. How do I come against that, right? And so that was definitely the change for us. We never really wanted to go back over there again. In fact, we didn't have much contact with him afterwards. He would make promises that he would come to get me, because again, I'm always a daddy's girl. I still always wanted his attention. And I don't know now, like looking back, did I want to put myself in a risky situation so that I could take some of the blunt off of, like, you know, that sacrifice that people make for their loved ones? It's survivor guilt, you know, basically is kind of what it is. If it would have happened to me, kind of deal that was going on maybe in my life. But it also opened up a door to the way that I thought that men receive love. They receive love when you act sexual towards them. And so I usually tell the story about, you know, think about what you wanted to be when you were growing up, when you were a little girl. What would you want to be? A ballerina, Cinderella? Did you want to be, my daughter always said, when she was little, I'd say, what do you want to be when you grow up? She'd say, a waitress. But she saw, my daughter has a servant's heart, so that's what she saw when she looked at them. But for me, I wanted to be a Playboy model when I was little, 8, 9, 10 years old, because that's what my dad had. He had Playboys in his house, and that's what he modeled to me. And so I spent a lot of years trying to seek that kind of attention from men. That one instance, and those several incidences in my life that kind of led to trying to self-medicate. A lot of people say that marijuana is the gateway drug. If you've ever heard of that being said, really, trauma is the gateway to addiction. You know, it definitely biologically changes our mind, it changes the way our brain thinks, and it fractures us. And so that we no longer can perceive the future as something good because we formulate our past experiences, our future experiences by our past experiences. So it takes us out of the present moment. So it takes us out of being able to enjoy who we are now and what we're going to be. And it keeps us from being able to project that something good will happen in the future. And so I spent a lot of years trying to compensate for that and to, seek my mom's approval too, because again, I've always been a daddy's girl. And my mom's husband, Rick, the one who was my stepdad, I loved him dearly. They ended up divorcing, not because of anything that had happened, just it wasn't a good relationship fit. We had 2 other sisters. I always say we come in pairs, me and my sister Amy, and then my sister Susan and my sister Kelly. And then my mom married again. They've been married for 30 years, 30 plus years. I have a little brother who is my son's age. And so there's 6 of us in the family. We have a stepsister, and my little brother's the youngest. But that divorce also put a fracture in my life. Like, there's another man who doesn't belong or fit in our family. And it changed the way that I thought, like, if I weren't good enough, I knew my mom loved me, but if I weren't good enough, if I didn't perform, was that something that was going to happen to me too? I already had kind of a shaky foundation from relationship with my dad, and I had this trauma, so I always had to perform. I always, and still really always want to please my mom. I want her to be proud of me, always. And it wasn't for his lack of trying to connect with me. He was still always there. But he's like I am. He's a fly by the seat of, well, he doesn't wear skirts, but I'm a fly by the seat of my skirt kind of girl, and he's a fly by the seat of his pants kind of guy. So I always say it's funny how much alike we are, and we're not even biologically related, but we are a lot alike. We still have a great relationship to this day. He's a wonderful man. He lives in Alaska, and I just recently, last year, got to go spend an entire month in Alaska with him. So it was very healing for me, and it was a great, just like relaxing trip. But he still couldn't really be much of a father because we had this broken home. And then by then, my addiction had already started. Like, I was dabbling around in 6th, 7th grade with marijuana, and of course experimenting with sex, because that's what I thought love was to get sex. And so by 7th, 8th grade, I was already pretty much on my way out the door. And that trauma of the broken family and him leaving again and my parents' divorce just kind of sent me deeper into, well, I'm leaving and running away and escape. And so I got pregnant when I was 16 years old, and I gave birth to that baby, and I put her up for adoption. And again, that was another traumatic event for me, because it was another loss. It was one more thing, because during the time when I was pregnant, I had thought, I finally have something that will love me back, that will never leave me nor forsake me. That's what I thought in my mind as a 16-year-old girl who had all these fractures in her brain. I thought something that would never leave me nor forsake me. But my mom, being who she is, and I am grateful for this, she has never let me waller. My mom, her philosophy of life is, put your big girl panties on. You made your bed, you're gonna have to lie on it. If you have this responsibility is yours. Do it. And I am grateful for that, because that's what made me who I am. It's what helped me through the trials that I've had to go through. So she just was like, okay, well, what's your plan? You have this baby, you haven't completed your education, you dropped out of high school, you have no job, what about daycare? I mean, she just asked all these very real questions. And so we entertained the idea of putting the baby up for adoption, and I did. And my heart was really broken at that time, and that really just I just went off the deep end, really, honestly. And my mom, as good as she is, and again, the thinking about making you who you are and really making you rise up to meet your responsibility, she would say things like, I love you, but I do not like you right now. And at the time when I couldn't even like me, I did not like me. I thought about the trauma, the way that I had treated the way that I couldn't get anybody to love me. And I had all this brokenness, and to hear your mom say, I love you, but I don't like you. If your own mother doesn't like you, then who else is gonna like me? But I know as a grown person, what she meant. What she meant was, all the behavior that you're doing is really terrible, and I don't like your behavior. She loved me, she loves me. But at the time, that's not what I heard. I heard, if your own mother doesn't like you, nobody is gonna like you. So I just tried really hard to make people like me. I would give them what they wanted. If they wanted sex, I gave them sex. Man, woman, whatever, gave them sex. If they had drugs, then I would try to manipulate them for drugs. And I really kind of went into this dark place. And during that time I met my first husband, my son's father. And when I met him, he actually was dating my sister. But then we ended up connecting because my sister had her own struggles, of course, dealing with all the things and the pain that she went through. And we always had a close-knit, kind of close friends because we were around the same age. And so she brought him home for dinner, and I met him, and I just fell in love with him. He had these beautiful, piercing blue eyes. I mean, the best blue eyes that you've ever seen in your life. And he had this black mohawk, which was great. And then he had this piercing that went from his nose to his ear to his chest. And I was like, I need that in my life. I need him. And so I met him, and we got together, hooked up. I mean, I lived in tents on the side of the road. I lived in abandoned houses. Everything in my life could fit in a backpack, basically a journal and a pillow. That's all really that I had. But through him, I also met his parents, who were apostolic Pentecostal believers. And so that was really the first introduction that I had to this truth that I know today. I remember the first time so she would bribe us. She would say, I'll take you to church, I'll feed you, but you're coming to church with me on Sunday. And I would say, oh, all right, well, we'll come to church, because I had been to church here and there growing up, a Protestant church. I grew up going to Catholic school. I went to Catholic grade school, went to Catholic high school. So church, okay, you sit down, you mass, you kneel, you stand, you sit, you do all of that business, right? That was my experience with church. And so they took me to what is now Grace Point Church, which is what I call home in Cincinnati. And Bishop Joe Sizemore was the pastor during that time. And Pastor and Sister Sizemore were there, but they had an evangelist speaking that night. And I remember walking in, and Damon Patton was one of the ushers, and I had on bright red lipstick. I had short black hair. He and I had matching mohawks, by the way, at the time. But I wore my mohawk down. I wasn't going to be disrespectful. I wore my mohawk down, but my hair was dyed jet black. I had all the black around my eyes, and the bright red lipstick. And I had teenage angst. I was like going in there with some teenage angst. But at the same time, I was still like, kind of ditzy a little bit. So teenage angst with ditz, I don't know what that really is, but it was me at that time. So I walk in the church, and Brother Damon Patton had the kindest eyes ever. And he just took me like by the shoulder and shook my hand, and he said, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And I was like, all right, well, this is weird. And then another Brother Alan Rice, who still goes to church there, opened the door. He's like, I am so glad you're here. Open the doors of the sanctuary with me. And we went in, we sat down, and then the worship began. And I was like, this is unusual. Okay. And so the whole time I'm sitting there, I'm really not understanding kind of what's going on. People are singing about the blood. I'm worried that I got into an occult. I didn't really know what was going on there. And so we had this evangelist that was there, and he began to preach. And I was sitting, okay, so there's two sections right here in a middle aisle of the church. And I was sitting kind of on the end in case I needed to run because I wasn't really sure what was happening. If I was in an occult, I wanted a way out. That's my PTSD brain. Where is your way of escape? That's what I'm always thinking when I go into a room. So I'm sitting on the corner, and the preacher's walking down the aisle, and I have the back of the pew like this, and I'm like elbowing my beautiful mohawked man saying, we need to get out of here. I don't know what's going to happen here. But that was my very first experience with Pentecost. So I look for that fear in people's eyes when they come into the church, and I usually try to sit by them and assure them that everything is going to be okay. Don't worry, we are not in a cult. So fast forward on, I had my son. We did well for a little while, but drugs still played a major part of our life. You know, what started out as marijuana ended up with cocaine, crack, and eventually ended up, heroin and a needle. And so that's just the way the progression of things go, because nothing will ever satisfy or get rid of that dull ache. Nothing will ever do that you can find in this world. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I tried to kill myself. I just wanted to just be done. I wanted to get rid of the pain. I wanted to get rid of the agony. I wanted to get rid of the depression. I wanted to get rid of the guilt and the shame. I just could not. It would be to points where I couldn't breathe. And so I was hospitalized one severe time that I had overdosed, I remember, and it was just as normal. So I want people also to know this, that people who try to commit suicide, it will look normal on the outside. My husband had gotten up. Well, we had left each other at that time. And that was kind of crumbling because I didn't know what I was gonna do. I had had an affair because that's what I knew. If I was going to get drugs and alcohol, I was going to have sex for it, or I was going to, need to meet someone. And I had no idea what marriage was or what relationships were. I just knew, I liked attention, and that's the way that I knew to get it. So I had gotten my son together. He was like 2, I think. I was working in a dental office at the time. Got him together, put his little coat on, took him to the sitters. He was going to a sitter around the corner from where I worked. Dropped him off the sitter, kissed him on his head, because what in my thoughts were, everybody is better off without me, because everything I touch just turns to dust. Everything I touch. I can't get anything right. Those were the things that were going around in my mind. So that's what some people think, that they're better off without me. Just knowing that I'm gone, I'm not going to be able to interfere with the way that he will be raised. He'll be better off never having known me. So I dropped him off at the sitters, and I went home, and I opened up a couple of bottles of Tylenol and took Tylenol PM and drank them down with a beer. But then I got scared because the darkness started to come. And I started to feel really bad. And so I went into the bathroom and I vomited, and why did I call the place where I work? I don't know why I called the place where I work. I called the place where I work, and I had told them what I'd done, and they sent the ambulance for me. So I went to the hospital. Of course, I was I was in the ICU for a little while, and then I was involuntarily committed for about 72 hours. And FYI, 72 hours is never really long enough. They didn't have a discharge plan for me. They didn't have any way for me to know that I was gonna be okay. So I did finally go home, but the emptiness was still there, and then my son, my in-laws, the ones that took me to church, they had my son because, I was hurting and I couldn't take care of him. I couldn't even take care of myself. They would bring, I'd have him over, and I tried to be a good mom. I just couldn't. I hurt too bad. I had emptiness. I had this gaping hole that I could not fill with people, places, things, drugs. I couldn't fill it. So I met this man who eventually, he ended up being my daughter's dad, and he had just rolled out of prison. 6'2", 270 pounds, just rolled out of prison. And he was a cocaine trafficker, one of the largest in our areas. And in my brain, I had hit the jackpot. I'm like, drug dealer, all the money, all the drugs, all the liquor. He's older than I am. This is my way of escape. This is my way out, okay? So we hooked up. And if anybody out there has ever experienced drugs and alcohol, you know that stuff ain't free. It ain't free. And instead of paying with money, I paid with a pound of flesh on several occasions. He was 6'2", 270 pounds, muscles, right out of the penitentiary. When they're in the penitentiary, they got nothing to do but work out. So that's what he did when he was there. I was a heroin cocaine addict and weighed probably 98 pounds, wringing wet, literally wringing wet. And he would throw me around like a rag doll. He would throw me out he would wake up in the middle of the night and just pick me up out of our bed and throw me out into the middle of the highway, pushed me out of a car. He broke my nose. I was hospitalized several occasions because of the abuse towards him. And I was able to share my story with a group of police officers not too long ago. And I told them, I said, every time I would call the police for help, I would be outside trying to get back into my house, or we would be outside fighting, and the police would see me punching him and then take me to jail. I said, I never understood that. I mean, like, if you could just look at the dynamics of a 6'2", 270 pound person and a 90-pound girl hitting that person, what in your mind would think that would be going on? And I saw a lot of their eyes go, wow. Like, I was so happy to be able to share that story because I wanted them to say, let me investigate a little further here and find out what's going on. Now, long story short, if they had to think about it, were they keeping me from being beat up further along the night? They were, but they were putting me in jail for public intoxication in a jail cell that wasn't very helpful, and it was terrible. The floor was cold, the toilet was metal. It's not a very helpful situation. And then every day I would go back to that situation. When we would all sober up, I would go right back. So he had really done it what I thought was the last time. My daughter was 9 months old, and he hit me again. He beat, I woke up, I had blood all over my face. I had this crack over my eye here, and he was choking me. That's how I kind of came to. And so I grabbed my daughter out of the bed and I ran up to the gas station and I called my mother, and she did come and pick me up. So when she picked me up, she took me to her home, but I'm a mess. I'm a mess. I'm still calling him and, pretty much cussing him out over the telephone. And my mom, when I woke up the next morning, when I finally did pass out, I woke up the next morning, there was the phone book that was open on the dining room table. The Women's Crisis Center was circled, and there was a note that says, you have till 5 p.m. until I get home from work. You need to find your way there. Which again, my mom was not one, she's not an enabler, and I'm so grateful for that. I really am. And so I thought, well, great. Of course, at the time I didn't see that. At the time I was like, well, she never wants to help me. But that was me being a victim, and that was me being in my pity party. So I called my stepdad, my dad that I call dad that lives in Alaska. I called him and I said, here's the situation that's going on. So he gave me his van. And so at that time, I only had custody of my daughter. My son, I decided to leave at his grandparents' house because the people that I was involved with were very volatile. Like, I've had guns pointed to my head, there was money, guns, drugs, and as a 2-year-old, I didn't feel like that was a good environment for him. So I did leave him at his grandparents' house, and they protected him for me. They took him to church and protected him for me. But I still had Audrey, and so my dad let me borrow his van. My mom did find me employment through the company that she worked for, so she was helping me help myself. And I went to go live at the Women's Crisis Center, and my dad took my daughter, so I didn't have to pay for daycare. So she's 9 months old. She's living with my dad and one of my sisters at his house. I'm living at the Women's Crisis Center. But to me, it takes my mind and my soul and my spirit back to the loss and the hurt and the pain, all the way back to when I was 17 and gave that baby up. You know, I remember when Audrey was born and they put her in my arms. First of all, I didn't even know what her name was going to be. I did not acknowledge the pregnancy the entire time I was pregnant. I still continued to drink here and there throughout my pregnancy. I still continued to use drugs, cocaine. I still continued to use marijuana. I would have nightmares that she would be born with fetal alcohol syndrome because I was worried, but the pain of acknowledging a pregnancy with a man that I didn't even love really was like was torment to me. I did not want to have her because I didn't want to be tied to him and I didn't want to be tied to loss. But so I didn't even have a name for her. I remember when I went into labor, it was really mild labor, like nothing. Zachary I had induced, but with Audrey I did not. Well, I didn't know what her name was going to be, and I remember sitting on the side of my bed, and I am not in church. I had that one experience with going to church, Pentecost. Well, she would take us to church here and there throughout, but never had an experience with God, only going to the house and people praying for me, for sure. I mean, they were praying. You can believe that. But I sat on the side of my bed and I looked at the TV screen and I saw the name Audrey come across and I heard the name Lucille in my ear. Audrey Lucille, because God knows our name. He knows our name. He gives it to us. And so he sent an angel down to whisper my sweet little baby girl's name in my ear. And my great-grandmother's name is Lucille. So it's kind of her namesake, but not one that I chose. I know that it's one that he chose. He knows our name. And so I said, okay, Audrey Lucille, that's her name. And when they put her in my arms when she was born and all the stuff that I was going through, I remember saying, it's me and you. I promise to never let anything come between us. We're going to get through this together. We're going to have life and we're going to do life together. You know, no one will take you from me. But I still could not get it together. I still couldn't get my life together. Even though I had all the love, I still had all the hurt and I didn't know how to get out of it. How do you get out of it? You're stuck in the middle of all of this junk and sitting in it and not knowing how to get out. And so when she was 9 months old, I let her go there. But to me, in that moment was, okay, I need to numb the pain. I need to, I'm away from her and I got to get out. So I went to one of my friends from the Women's Crisis Center was moving, and I was like, I'll help you move, but you got to give me some V's, Valium. Okay, for all of you out there who don't know what V's are, they're Valium. At least at the time they were. They're probably something else now. So we did some Valium, we went to the bar, and then the next thing you know, I needed to have a little bump up. And what that means is I need to get high from some kind of speed so that I can continue drinking, so I can be very awake and drunk. So we went to his house and he wasn't there. I can't remember. I don't think she was with me. She wasn't with me. I think I had dropped her off. And no, she wasn't with me. So I went to his house to try to find some stuff and I couldn't find anything. Couldn't find the drugs, couldn't find anything. So all of a sudden, everything just hit me at once. And for those of you who have never experienced blind rage, I will tell you, please don't ever let your temper get there, because it's intense. I literally had blind rage. I had all of this emotions. I was mad with him, mad with my dad. I had all of this rage of things that I could not control coming out. I tore the pictures off the wall. I tore the books over and just tore everything up. I tore the covers off the bed. I threw them all in a pile in the living room floor, and I lit one match and I walked out the door. And I went to the bar, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go to the bar after you commit a crime, just in case you guys need some tips. You're supposed to go to the bar after you commit a crime. So I went to the bar, and when I came out of the bar, because the house was here and the bar was here, when I came out of the bar, the whole house was on fire, and I was surprised by that, because that was not what I was thinking was gonna happen. So I'm like, oh wow, the whole house is on fire. So then I went to the restaurant where we used to work and sat at the bar until the police officer came in and asked to see me. I'm like, I don't know what happened. I'm sitting here drinking a Long Island iced tea. It's pretty crazy that the house is on fire. So needless to say, I was arrested because it was so obvious that I was the last one in there. And I went to the police station, and remember my dad, the one I call father, the one that raised me, remember he's a fireman. And he was on the arson task force that night. So, favorite part of a story is irony. There's a little bit for you in case you like it too, okay? So he was on the arson task force, and he's sitting across from me saying, Steph, what happened? He had seen me several occasions. Whenever I needed rescuing, he would visit me in the hospital, because whenever I got beat up, I would go to the hospital, and then they would put me in the psychiatric unit for a fefew days so that I could cool off. But he always made sure he came, and he would tell my mom, you don't want to go there. You don't want to see her like this. It's pretty, my eyes would be black, and my face, I'd be nearly unrecognizable. So he knew the relationship that we were having. I was like, I don't know what happened. Well, they took me to jail, and I had been to jail several times before, put me in the drunk tank, but something very unique happened this time. Like, I was usually let out on my own recognizance. Well, this time they deloused me. I was like, what is going on here? Well, I've never been this way before. And they put me in this blue uniform, and I'm like, oh, wow, things are getting real here. What's going on? And then they sent me back to the jail cell. And so when I walked into that jail cell, it was, I really am terrible with numbers and how big things are, but it was a small room. Had a bathroom over here, of course, with no door. It had 10 bunk beds all the way around, so enough for 20 women, and a couple of metal picnic table benches here, and then a phone on the wall. That's what it looked like. Big metal door going through. When I walked into that room, every single woman was singing praises to God, getting ready for church. There were 20 of them. And I felt like just this presence of the Lord, what I know now to be the presence of the Lord, say to me, again, not serving God, come in and rest. And so I did. I slept for a few days. I was sick for a few days, but I spent that time in there resting. I didn't have fear. I was mad, because I couldn't get out. I would call my mom and tell her terrible things and how she was leaving me to rot in jail, which, by the way, I apologize for that. I don't think I've ever done that, so I apologize now. I have to write you a letter later. So I apologized, or I wanted to get out. And so I stood before the judge. When you go to court the next day, you have to stand before the judge and say whether or not you're guilty. And they were charging me with arson in the first degree, which carried a 20-year to life sentence. And I was 22 at the time. So 22 years old, standing before a judge, battered, beaten, broken, bruised, traumatized little girl with a 20-year to life sentence. And that kind of, I don't know, it was just I don't know what happened. I was just like, I can't believe that this is my life right now. And so I spent 8 months, and I'm not talking about in a jail with windows or anything that you see on TV. I'm talking about in the belly of the whale. It was a jail under the jail, because there was only 2 cells for women. And it was underneath the courthouse in the basement with no windows. We were not allowed out of that jail cell maybe 1 hour a month for 8 months I spent down there. It was the time you were allowed to smoke, and the nicotine just ran down the walls. And women coming and going, the lights on almost 23 hours a day, and the TV and the noise. That's where I spent 9 months. It was the belly of the whale. But in that, I began to get so hungry for change and for God. He began to speak to me. He began to deal with me. And I am a big proponent of 12-step recovery, a huge proponent. It's just a pathway to God. It's a quick way to walk through in your mind of accepting responsibility, repenting from it, believing God can restore you, surrendering your will, looking at your character defects, applying them and comparing them to the character of Christ, and then giving that back to other people. That's what the 12 steps of recovery are, and it's a language of love that you can speak to other people who are hurting, who don't know how to get out of their mess. I always hear the phrase, you just need Jesus. you just need Jesus. And that's great to say to somebody, because we do. We just need Jesus. But how do I apply that phraseology to my sin-sick, twisted, confused life? And a lot of times it's walking through those 12 steps. And so I did that when I was in jail. And I wrote what your 4th step is, which is getting out all the garbage of people that have harmed you, all the people you've harmed, taking responsibility and really looking at it and getting it all on paper, just taking a fearless and moral inventory of your life and how you got to be where you are. And I ask myself these questions still today. All of my best efforts got me where I am today. And I look around and I say, where am I? And do I need to change my best efforts? And so that's what that program asks you to do. That's what those steps ask you to do. Look at all of your best efforts and ask yourself that question, where are you today? So as I began to get the junk out, that's repentance, right? God yourself and someone you trust. I was telling God, I'm sorry for all this. I'm getting the junk out. I'm gonna let you heal me. And so during that time, of course, people were praying for me. And so they sent a woman in from the Apostolic Church down in Covington. Her name was Doris Johnson. Doris Johnson went on to get her reward recently. And I can't wait to rejoice on the streets of heaven with her, because she is part of my story, and she was faithful to coming and teaching me Bible studies every single week. She would come to that jail and she would teach me Bible study. And she began to talk to me about needing to get baptized. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really know about, I was baptized in the Catholic Church, sprinkling of the water, and I thought that that was good enough. So God began to deal with me about being a new creature, needing a new start. And so I remember when he gave me this personal revelation of who he was. I was in my prison cell or jail cell, and I was sitting on the top bunk reading my Bible, and I was reading in the book of John. And it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And then as a few things down, it says, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. I literally sat up in my bunk, and I was like, oh, God's name is Jesus. Oh my goodness, God's name is Jesus. And so I ran to the phone and I called my first husband's parents, because they were the ones that were praying for me. They were the ones that sent the woman in to do Bible study with me. They were the ones that took me to that apostolic experience, that first apostolic experience. And I got on the phone with them. I'm like, you all are never going to believe this. I said, God's name is Jesus. And they were like, yes, Stephanie, that's what we've been trying to tell you this whole time. It takes me a minute. I mean, I need like the brick over the head. And that was my brick over the head moment, to realize that I needed to put his name on my life. I needed to get his signature on my life. And I definitely needed a new life. So they brought in a horse trough and put it in the drunk tank at the Kenton County Detention Center in Covington, Kentucky. And I died, Stephanie Ann Hughes, that day. I died to that person and went and got buried. And when I arose, I became, in the newness of life, Stephanie Ann Jesus Christ. And it was one of the greatest transforming moments of my life. Now, was everything perfect after that? I wish I could say yes, but it wasn't, because I still have junk. Today, I still have junk. But in heaven, that record was gone of who I was. God chose to forget all of the things I used to be and all of the things I'd done. He chose to forget that, and I chose to accept his forgiveness. And so I ended up going before Judge Summy, who is known for a hard-nosed judge. She's really known for that. And so I remember being sentenced. I took a plea bargain because I didn't want to tell the truth about what I had done. I just said, I flicked a cigarette, I'm coming out, right? That's all that happened. And so I took a plea bargain for a lesser charge of attempted arson in the 2nd degree, and carried a 5 to 10 year sentence. So I could get anywhere from 5 years to 10 years. And I sat down before her and she said, Stephanie, I don't feel like anybody has ever told you when enough is enough. And I was like, okay, I can get on board with that. And she said, I'm here to tell you that enough is enough. This is enough. And she put her hammer down and she said, 8 years, bam. So I got 8 years to the Kentucky State Penitentiary for Women, Pewee Valley in Kentucky. But through that, I was nominated by actually the guards in our jail to go to what's called the first incarceration shock treatment program. And so it's kind of a specialized area, and they treat you like boot camp, literally boot camp. So, I mean, I'm talking about like getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning with a drill sergeant with pans, didn't get out of bed, that kind of business. And so I was chosen by our guards to send me there because they saw hope in me. They saw the potential that God saw in me when I was there. They saw that. And so God works on your behalf. He provides all your needs. He knows exactly where you're going, and he knows what you need, and I needed that. So I went there, completed 4 months of the program, made parole first time out. And then I went to after I made parole, I went to the Women's Residential Treatment Center. And I remember when I was getting ready to get out of treatment, I still was going to church. I had a great pastor's wife. Thank you, pastors' wives, for never giving up on people like us who, when you come to their door, they say they're going to go to church, then you come to their door and they say, no, I'm not going. Well, my pastor's wife would never allow that. She'd say, yeah, you are. I came, get in the car. And I was either stupid enough or smart enough to just be obedient, and I got in the car. And so she would take me to church. She'd come get me on Wednesdays and Sundays. She had me out door knocking, which I thought, at the time, I was like, I'm not doing that. Yes, you are. You're doing it. She would make up little packets, and I went door knocking. So I just did things, and I stayed close to the church. And so I ended up, remember leaving treatment and putting my first step on the floor and thinking, I don't know where I'm going to go or what I'm going to do. God provided for me a car and a job and a daycare. Before I put my foot on the floor and I said, I need to go pray. And God provided me all of those things. Before my foot even hit the floor, I got a call. And my mom says, I have a place for you to live. We'll go get you a car. We'll go drive. Or I was going to go live with my dad. That's what I was going to do, live with my dad. And we'll get you a car and a job. Well, when I got to my dad's house, it was an apartment that he was living in. I went back to that apartment, and God will do things. He will bring you full circle in life. He really will. The very first apartment where my dad was living, I walked into that apartment, and it was the very first place I ever stuck a needle in my arm, was right in that apartment. And now, in the program and in addiction, we talk about triggers. And I heard the Lord clearly say, I brought you here because I want you to know that I have done a work in you. And it is a miracle. It is a miracle, because I didn't want to go back to that life, but I was scared still. So I did go to church one night. I was going to church faithfully, and I went to church. I went back to the church where I hung on to the pews. Bishop Sizemore, Sister Sizemore were there. And I walked into that church, and I knelt at that altar, and I said, Lord, I'm so scared. I don't want to go back to being who I was, and I know that I'm not healed all the way. I'm still having all of these issues with men and those desires, and I want to change. I want to be different. As I'm pouring out my complaint before the Lord in raw honesty, because that's what He desires. He already knows. He wants us to acknowledge that we have those feelings, so that those feelings can be brought to the attention of our flesh, so that He can heal them. And so I'm pouring out my complaint before the Lord. Next thing you know, I'm feeling the Holy Ghost. I'm speaking in this heavenly language, and it is better than any needle I ever stuck in my arm, better than any sex, better than anything that I've ever experienced in my entire life. And one of the best parts about that is that never goes away. Never, ever. It's there forever and ever and ever, and I never regret it. I never have to be ashamed of it. It never goes away. It's always there, constantly healing me, constantly filling me. In fact, after I got the Holy Ghost, I literally could not stop speaking in tongues for days. I was working in an office by myself, and so I could worship all day long, and I would just practice speaking in tongues and worship all day long. And the phone would ring, and I'd go, hello? I would have to forcibly try to speak in English. So the Lord really did a great work in me. He filled me with joy, peace, love, temperance, meekness. He filled and prepared me with all those things. But unfortunately, I still have to live in the flesh suit. The flesh suit is my enemy because it still wants to behave in an unseemly way. That was kind of the beginning, really, of my relationship with God, but not the end of my troubles in life. I went on to marry a man who had extramarital affairs. So then I divorced him, and then I married again, because loneliness and the way that I thought I was supposed to live life. Loneliness is a hole. And so after I left my second husband, that would have been my third husband. I've been married and divorced 3 times. After I was divorced the third time, I was going to church, and my great friend and pastor's wife at the time, she said, you know what, you need a spiritual ICU. She's like, your spirit man is sick. You need to go and you need to pray. You need to fast, only raw vegetables, only apostolic music, only Bible. And you need to pray through that lonely, get into that, get your spirit man beefed up. And so I did that. I obeyed her advice. I took her advice. And I remember, again, sitting there day 2 with my raw vegetables and living by myself and having only worship music on and nothing. I was like, Lord, this sucks, is what I said. Apologize the language, but I did say that to the Lord because I was being real with him. I hated it. I am a person who enjoys company. I feel like the world needs to be full of words, and I usually need to be the one saying them. And so I like that kind of stuff, being quiet and sitting still no, not for me. But I was lonely, and all of a sudden when I'm telling him, I was like, Lord, don't you know I'm lonely? And as soon as I said that, the Spirit of the Lord swept in, like in my apartment building, and he said, I am knocking on the door of your heart. And if you will open it, I'll come in and I'll sup with you. I was like, okay, well, all right. And so that led me down this Bible study of what does it mean to sit down and have a meal and share a meal with someone, and how eating food and what it does to our body chemistry and how it relaxes us, and what God was doing when he had the 12 disciples down before he went to the garden at the Last Supper. He was admonishing, he was correcting, he was exposing. That's what God meant to me, that he wanted to sit down and get to know me. He wanted to correct me and love me. He wanted me to lay my head on his shoulder and be beloved of him. That's what he wanted from me. And that loneliness has never come back since that day. I'm not lonely anymore. I'm single, choosing to be single, and I love it. I love being single. I have that desire from way back when I was a little girl, that attention seeking, that sexual impropriety, and that just all of that, it's gone, completely gone. God has healed me from that. Well, in the story, in 2011, God gave me a plan for my life. Remember, I am not a planner. I'm a fly by the seat of my skirt. So God gave me this plan for my life. He said, you have a 3, 5, 10-year plan. I was like, okay, perked me up. 3, 5, 10-year plan. Okay, in 3 years, I was to complete my bachelor's degree and become a registered nurse. Well, because I had already started on the journey for my bachelor's degree. So become a registered nurse. And in 5 years, I was to go back and get my master's degree to become a nurse practitioner. And in 10 years, I would be running a recovery center for his glory. And I was like, okay, I'm a felon. Just putting that out there, I am a felon. So I thought, well, I could get the education, no big deal. If I, just get it. And at the time, I was like, all right, I'll get the education. I'm having a good time. I started school with my mom. My mom and I started nursing school together, and we had a blast. She was able to finish in 4 years, but it took me a little bit longer because I had kids and a couple of divorces and challenges. But I stuck to it. I was like, this is the plan that the Lord gave to me. Because when we pray and we say that when the scripture says, God will give you the desires of your heart, that doesn't mean he's going to give you everything you want. That means that when you pray and seek his will, he puts those plans for your life that he knows in your heart so that you will seek after those plans. So God put those desires in my heart, and I just put my nose down and I did it. But I wanted to know how you get it done the fastest because I just like to do everything fast. So I went to school, got my bachelor's degree in nursing, and I got an associate's degree in psychology because I love the brain. It's my favorite organ. Anybody else out there who likes organs, I think I don't know if it's weird or not, but the brain is my favorite organ. It's like all of your existence right there. Without it, you can't breathe, think, be. I mean, it's incredible. It's my favorite organ. Plus, I love human behavior. I love to watch people and how they interact with the world, and I just love psychology. And so I got that as a minor degree, and then I was like, okay, but now here we are to the point where I'm a convicted felon and I'm gonna apply for a nursing license. That's, okay, Lord. I think what I need to do here is fill out for a pardon. So I did that because I am gonna do things, I'm a helper. And so I filled out the pardon and put it on the desk. I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for it. Like, I check the mail every single day for that pardon, but simultaneously, I still proceeded with the nurse, taking my state boards and applying for the license. Well, I didn't get the pardon. I didn't. I was so upset. I didn't hear anything. Like, it's just a radio silence. But I did get a nursing license. I became a registered nurse as a convicted felon, not only in one state, but I was like, hey, let's just try Ohio too. And I did. So Kentucky and Ohio gave me a convicted felon a nursing license. I was ecstatic. I was so excited that God gets the glory for that, not man. God did. God moved on my behalf. He knew the plans he had for me, and he gave it to me, and I pursued in obedience and did what he asked me to do, and he allowed it to happen. And I was so excited. I was like, okay, well, God, you're God, you could do anything, right? So I got my nursing license and I began to work in a hospital. I worked with some incredible nurses. I learned so much. Like, I love to learn, and I love to get other people excited about learning. So I can be real enthusiastic about that. So I would get everybody, I would say, okay, I've never done this before. Have you? And they'd say no. I say, okay, have you? And they'd say no. Okay, we'll watch a YouTube video about it. And then we're all gonna go in and we're gonna play show and tell together. Okay, we're gonna do it together. All right, and we do it. And we go in and we would do it. It was great. It was a very good environment for learning. There is a phrase in nursing that says that nurses eat their young, which I heard about, but fortunately never experienced, because I work with such a good group of nurses that we were all about encouraging and strengthening one another, which I love. That's the passion that I have in life right now, is to build other women up and to encourage them to be everything that God has called them to be. I love that. That's one of my favorite things to do in the world. And so I still had this hearing of, you have to go back and finish your master's degree. So I didn't do that right away. I got a job after I left the hospital in 2015. I got a job through our organization, and I helped them to bring in medication-assisted treatment to our area. So outpatient treatment center. I was asked to help get this place started. I partnered with a addictionologist, a board-certified addictionologist and family medicine doctor who I learned a lot from. Like, she's still my mentor today. I love her. She's very thorough. She's compassionate. She's very cautious, and that's who I am like that too. And she's very interested in helping people, not just shuffle through, get them out the door. So we opened up the practice in Northern Kentucky area, and I worked there for a while, but I had to get my master's degree, and I was very comfortable there. So the Lord had to make me miserable, because I have to have a little piece of sand underneath my seat before I'll move, because I question myself. All the mistakes that I've made, I always have self-doubt that it's not me moving, that it's not God moving, it's me. I'm self-willing. I don't want to self-will. I want to make sure that this is the right thing to do. So a lot of times God has to make me very uncomfortable before I'll move, because I'm still trying to learn how to move when he says move, instead of just being uncomfortable. So I left there, and when I left there to go back to get my master's degree, I remember sitting at the table with my friend, who was my pastor's wife at the time, and she said, just do it, just enroll. I was like, oh, all right, but I don't have the money, da, da, da. And so when I hit the enroll, there were 5 miracles to get me to go to school. Miracle number 1 was that the registration fee was $0. That was miracle number 1. Miracle number 2, college was on sale. The degree that I was seeking was on sale. Who doesn't love a good sale? It was like they were offering $5,000 off. It was like a coupon fest for college. So I was like, that's miracle number 2. Miracle number 3 was I was approached by Xavier University to become an adjunct professor for them, to teach nursing as an adjunct professor. So that paid me extra money, that paid for my school. And I can't really, off the top of my head, remember what the other 2 miracles were, but those were 3 huge financial miracles that I was really praying for, because I could not afford to do that. Oh, the third miracle was I left Journey and went to a place where I could work as needed so that I didn't have to be so bogged down with work. I could work, go to school, and manage all of that load. But there were miracles. God moved in that situation, so I did. So I went and finished up what God wanted me to do, and then with the schooling, and then again, here I am. You know, I'm a convicted felon. Just putting that out there, trying to help, trying to be helpful. I like to be helpful. And so I applied for my nursing license, or my nurse practitioner's license, but in the meantime, I got the pardon. And so I was like, oh, finally so all of those things that I did before that are gone in heaven are also gone off my slate under the blood in a pardon from the state of Kentucky. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, God, for the pardon. So I went to submit it, and I fill out, you have to do an extensive background check to be a nurse practitioner because you have prescriptive authority, which means that, you write prescriptions for people, you help them. And so when I went to do all of that, my background check came back and all of that junk was on my background check. The devil brings up your past all the time. So what card do you have to play when the devil brings your past up? The pardon card, thank you very much. Why is that so on there? I got the pardon card here, and my pardon card trumps all of these charges. And so what I had to do, and I didn't know at the time, was I had to fill out paperwork to get that expunged. So you need the pardon and expungement gone. But even though I had all of those things come up on my record, don't you know, I still got that nurse practitioner's license. I was astounded. I was like, I hadn't even done this process yet. And so that, again, God wants to have the glory for all of the things that he does for us. And without him moving on our behalf, we wouldn't be able to do those things. And he wanted to have the glory. He didn't want that pardon to get the glory for something that he gave. He wanted the glory. So he gets it 100%. I don't know how it happened. I just said yes. That's all I did was say yes to the process. And so I did get my nurse practitioner's license in 2020. I became a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, and now I work for an institution that does residential treatment and outpatient treatment, and I take care of all the women for their psychiatric mental health needs as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. And a lot of times that looks like, giving them a prescription, but more times than not, because it's a faith-based organization, it looks like, I'm praying for you. Can we pray? God has a plan for your life. Don't give up. Don't leave before the miracle happens. It looks like walking them through those 12 steps of recovery, and so I'm honored every single day that I get to do that and experience those things with those women. And I don't feel like the plan's over yet. I'm not. This is the 10th year, the 3-5-10-year plan. This is the fruition of the 3-5-10-year plan. And so I am looking forward to, what does that recovery center look like? What does that reentry center look like? What else could be on the horizon for the plans that God has for me? I'm still looking and still waiting for all of those things to unfold. And I can't wait. I sit on the edge of my seat with expectation for it to come. So I'm super excited about the future of whatever it is that God has for me. And a couple of things that I would leave for the next generation. One thing, I have 5 women that can say anything they want to me, and I know that I need to yield to them because they pray for me, they love me, they've proven themselves to me, and I got to choose them. God gave them to me for my perfection. And I love the verse, confess your faults one to another. Why does he say to do that? So that you can talk about your neighbor? No. He said the next part of the verse is so that you can pray for one another and be healed. Confess your faults, ladies. Get 5 women, get 1 woman that will speak into your life, and whatever it is that they say to you, you bow to immediately, that you yield to it because they're praying for you, they love you, and they want what's best for you. The next thing that I would say is don't seek to reach people. Don't seek to reach the world, the country, your family. Seek to have relationship with God. Seek His presence. Seek to be still with Him. Seek to let Him heal your heart. Seek to let Him get the dirt out of you. Because when we seek that, then your cup runs over. Then the Spirit and anointing of God flows from you because you're whole, you're healed, and then the Spirit of God will draw men to you, women to you, that you can minister to through the things that you've been through. And let go of all of that small stuff. We are a big ball of flesh that God's trying to make and mold into His likeness, and it doesn't happen overnight. Let go of all of that stuff. Talk to yourself the way you talk to your girlfriends. You can do it, girl. You got this. God is for you, not against you. You are able. God is able. And God gives His strongest battles to His weakest warriors. And He does that because when we're weak, He's strong. And I'm grateful for the weakness of addiction that He's given in my life, because without it, I would not have been where I am today. Without it, I would not know how to have an intimate relationship with someone else. And without it, I wouldn't know Him. And I'm grateful.